Chapter 24. The Court of the Ubar. In the central cylinder of Ar, that in which the Ubar has his palace and holds his court, in a room assigned to me, I drew upon my body the tunic of a warrior. It was fresh and clean, bright scarlet, pressed with hot, round irons warmed over fires. I buckled around my waist the belt and scabbard. They were of new leather, black and shining, with embossings of brass. But it was my old sword, the fine, familiar steel, remembered even from the siege of Ar many years before, that I dropped into the scabbard. Sitting on the edge of the stone couch, I bent down to tie my sandals. Hup, the fool, was sitting cross-legged on the chest across the room, his chin in his hands. There was much sun in the room. "I am an agent of priest-kings in Ar," said Hup. "From the beginning I have followed your movements in the city." "You are also of the party of Malenus," I said. "He is my Ubar," said Hup. "I have been honored to participate in his return to power." "I wonder if the priest-kings are much pleased by that turn of events." "They are realists," said Hup. "With Malenus on the throne," I said, "Ar will be dangerous." Hup smiled. "Ar is always dangerous," and he scratched one ear. "Better Malenus than Kurnus, surely," he said. True, I laughed. "It has taken years for Malenus to return," said Hup. "Many things were essential. In the time of Khazrak there was little that could be done. Khazrak, though uninspiring as an Ubar, and worse, not of Ar, was nonetheless an estimable ruler, an honest man, an intelligent, brave man, who sought the good of the city." "And Malenus?" I asked. "With all his faults," said Hup, "he is Ar itself." I thought of the magnificent Malenus, swift, brilliant, decisive, stubborn, vain, proud, a master swordsman, a townsman, a leader like a Lal among men, always to those of Ar the Ubar of Ubars. I knew that men would, and had, desert the homestone of their own city to follow him into disgrace and exile, preferring outlawry and the mountains to the securities of citizenship in their city, asking only that they be permitted to ride beside him, to lift their swords in his name. Malenus was like a god and a beast among men, inspiring the most fanatic loyalties, the most intense of enmities. There are few men such that other men would fight for the right to die for them. But Malenus, arrogant soldier, laughing warrior, was such a man. Malenus, I knew, could never be second in a city. He had now returned to Ar. "With the departure of Khazrak and the appointment of Minas Tentius Hinrabius as administrator of the city," said Hup, "the return of Malenus became practical." He rubbed his nose and looked at me. The left eye was the larger one and green. The right eye was normal, save that it, like its fellows, was blue. "By this time we had already had a network of agents in the city, both free and slave. Some of these you perhaps know." "The slave Phaeus," I said, "and the girls of the Street of Pots were of your party." "Yes," said Hup, "and most useful. Slave girls, as it is not the case with free women, may go anywhere, almost, in the city, gathering information, carrying messages. Few suspect that the collared wench may be on an important business. Even if apprehended, they seldom suffer more than a lashing, while serving the pleasure of those who have apprehended them. Phaeus once so suffered at the hands of Vankius of the guard Kurnus. I think that Malenus will give him to her." "Poor Vankius," I said. And doubtless the girls of the Street of Pots will be given some male slaves, said Hupp. I didn't envy the male slaves. Our most important single source of information, said Hupp, was the girls of the baths, particularly the Carpathian. There is a little in R that is not known in the baths. These girls were invaluable, both in the acquisition of information and the arrangements of contacts. It was through the girls of the baths that the plans for the uprising were transmitted to those who would follow Marlenus. Was a girl named Naila, I asked, of the Pool of Blue Flowers, among the agents of Marlenus? Oh, she was chief among them, said Hupp. I am pleased, I said. She, with others in the baths who worked for Marlenus, have already been freed, said Hupp. Good, I said. I am much pleased. And I looked at him. But what of those girls who did not work for Marlenus? I asked. Hupp looked puzzled. Well, they still wear their chain collars, said Hupp, and serve in the baths as slave girls. In the guise of Mamilius, I said, Marlenus of Ar, as things went from bad to worse in the city, in the midst of corruption and crime, gathered about himself a following. He gave the men of Ar, said Hupp, something to identify with. A hero, mysterious and overwhelming, a hero to sway their imaginations. He won the love of the city. And the Steels, I said, the new faction had their role to play in bringing about the downfall of the influence of Kernus, and later his downfall as Ubar. Of course, said Hupp. Through the Steels we wish to have a faction that would, like Myrmilius in the Stadium of Blades, sway the imagination of men and win the allegiance of thousands of those of Ar. It would be an independent faction, a new faction, cutting through and across the loyalties and politics of older factions. Further, it would be the means of defeating the Yellows. As we thought when it became clear that the Steels truly threatened the Yellows, Kernus' secret faction, his interest and allegiance would become clear. His betrayal of the Greens and his secret endorsement of the Yellows, which could only be for purposes of mercenary gain, were made clear in the events of the race of the Ubar. This secret interest and allegiance, regarded as treachery, as perfidious by the racing crowds of Ar, alone would have served to turn men against him. His true faction interests were revealed, and infuriated all those in the stadium, and perhaps mostly those of the Greens and the Steels. Then Marlenus, as Myrmilius, entered the stadium of Tarns, followed by his hundreds, followed by their thousands. Men had been turned against Kernus in both the Stadium of Blades and in that of Tarns, and in both by the cruelty and treachery of the man they had honoured as Ubar. These things, together with the dissatisfaction of men with the governance of the city and the safety of their homes, coupled with the memories of Ar's greatness when Marlenus had worn the medallion of supreme office, of Ar's splendour when she had stood in his day, feared, foremost, magnificent and glorious among the cities of Gaul, all these things turned the tides of power to our ends. To those of Marlenus, I said. His ends are our ends, said Hupp. The ends of Marlenus are the ends of Ar. Hupp looked up at me. Marlenus, he said, is the city. He is Ar itself. I said nothing. I remembered the daughter of Marlenus, Talena, from long ago. Nothing more was known of her in Ar than had been known in Korribar, or in the very nest of the priest-kings itself. Hupp leapt from the chest. Come, he said, let us go to the court of the Ubar. I looked at him. The Ubar, I said, may hold his court without me, I must soon be on my way from Ar. I had little wish now to share the glories of Marlenus, whatever rewards he might in his generosity choose to shower on me. I was sad. Marlenus had been kind to me. Yesterday evening a guard had presented himself in my room. "I bring you a girl," had said the man, "who would tie your sandals, who would serve your wine." But I sent him away, not even looking on the girl. The bright sunlight in the room, the scarlet of my tunic, the new leather, the metal embossing seemed as nothing to me. I wanted to be alone. The cause of the priest-kings had been advanced. The restoration of Marlenus to the throne of Ar had been accomplished, but beyond this there was little in which I could rejoice. "Please," said Hup, "accompany me to the court of my Uba." I looked down at him and smiled. "Ah, very well, small friend," I said. We began the long journey through the halls of Ar's great cylinder, almost a city in itself. At times we walked up swirling gradients, at times stairs, swirling and broad, leading higher and higher into the cylinder. Sometimes we walked through marble-floored passageways, in which, through narrow windows designed to be too small for a body to pass, but large enough for use as crossbow ports, I could see the blue sky of Ar's bright morning. Through the ports I could hear, ringing here and there in the city, signal bars proclaiming the gladness of the people. And then we would be walking deeper within the cylinder, down broad, carpeted, tapestried halls, set with energy lamps, seldom found in the homes of private citizens, emitting a soft, glowing light. Many of the doors had locks on them, the vast ornate locks in the centre of the door, so common in the northern cities. Some others were secured only by signature knots, presumably the doors to the compartments of unimportant retainers or members of the staff. In many cases, perhaps, the doors to the compartments of mere slaves. In the halls we passed many individuals who would normally, in Gorean fashion, lift the right hand palm inward, saying "Tal," which greeting in turn we returned. There were now no Torrentian guards in the central cylinder. The Torrentians had been disbanded, disgraced, and exiled from the city. Only the day before their purple cloaks and helmets had been taken from them before the great gate. Their swords had been broken, and they had been conducted by common warriors to the music of flute girls, a parsang beyond the walls of Ar, and ordered from her environs. Sophronicus, their captain, with other high officers, including Ceramides of Tyros, who had replaced Maximus Hengisius Quintilius as leader of the forces of Ar, they now lay chained in the dungeons of the central cylinder. The palace guard was now made up of warriors who had been of the party of Marlenus. Their helmets and cloaks were no different from those of the armed forces of Ar generally. The palace guard, I had learned from Hup, would be, on a staggered basis, rotated, in order that the honour of serving the Uba would be more broadly distributed, and further, presumably, that no given faction of men could come, in time, to dominate the guards. The pay of the guards, incidentally, was substantially reduced, perhaps in order that, in virtue of this sacrifice, the honour of the post might be made more clear, and that fewer invidious distinctions might grow up between the palace and the guard, and military generally, from which it was now composed. Most of the individuals in the central cylinder were men of lower caste, attending to their duties, with the exception of numerous scribes. I saw 2 physicians, and from time to time I saw a slave girl in the halls. The female state slave of Ar wears a brief grey slave livery, with matching grey collar. Save for the collar, it is identical with most common slave livery. Around her left ankle is normally locked a grey steel band, to which 5 simple bells of grey metal are attached. Many years ago, in Ar and Koraba, and several of the other northern cities, the common slave livery had been white, but diagonally striped. in one colour or another. Gradually, over the years, this style had changed. The standard livery was now also commonly slashed to the waist. As before, it remained sleeveless. These matters, generally in the cut of the robes and style of the tunics, undergo the transitions of fashion. I smiled. One of the decrees of Marlenus, uttered at his victory feast yesterday evening, to rounds of drunken cheers and applause, had been to decree a too-haut, approximately 2.5 inches, a too-haut heightening of the hemline in the already rather briefly skirted livery of female state slaves. This morning I suppose this decree would be adopted by the private slave owners of Ar as well. Indeed, I noted that already the effects of the decree were evident in the livery of the girls I passed in the halls. The hair of the female state slave, incidentally, is normally cut rather short and brushed back and around the head. The common slave girl, on the other hand, normally has a rather long hair, which is unbound. Was Philemon captured? I asked Hupp as we walked through the halls. Hupp laughed. Yes, he said. He tried to take refuge in the private compartments of Cairns. He told me that he used to have access to them to copy documents, I said. Hupp laughed. Apparently he was not as familiar with the apartments of Cairns as he led you to believe. I looked down at Hupp as we walked, and he grinned up at me. In attempting to enter the compartments of Cairns, he triggered a pitlock device and plunged 20 feet into a smooth-sided capture pit. We drew him out at our convenience. I laughed. He is now chained on his way to the Sada, along with the materials taken from the room of the beast and what had been brought in from the black ships. He, under the interrogation of priest kings, will doubtless reveal whatever he knows. I expect they will learn much from the other materials, probably more than from Philemon. Was the strange crossbow taken to the Sada? I asked, referring to the rifle in that fashion. Oh, yes, said Hupp. What will be done with Philemon in the nest when they learn what they wish from him? Oh, I don't know, said Hupp. Perhaps he will be kept as a slave. We were now passing along a carpeted corridor, rather more plain than many. I noted the doors here were secured only with signature knots. They were perhaps the doors to the compartments of slaves, housing little more, doubtless, than a straw mat, a washing bowl, and a small box in which might be kept some slave livery, and perhaps simple utensils, a plate and a cup. I glanced at the knots on the doors as we passed them. Soon we had emerged in the great domed chamber set with lights and stones, in which, on a high-stepped dais, sits the marble throne of the Ubar of Ar. Warriors saluted as I entered, lifting their swords from their sheaths. I lifted my hand, returning the salute. The room was filled with men in the robes of many castes, both high and low. On the throne itself, in the purple robes of the Ubar, regal, magnificent, sat Marlenus, Ubar of Ar, Ubar of Ubars. At his side and around the steps, in rough garb, stood warriors who had been with him as long ago as his exile in 10,110, who had fled with him to the Voltae and shared his outlawry, and now shared the glory of his restoration. There were, I noted, no initiates in the room. I gathered their influence in Ar was at an end, at least in the court of the Ubar. Marlenus lifted his hand to me. "Tal," he said. "Tal, Marlenus of Ar," I said. Then I stood to one side, Hupp at my side, to behold the doings of the Ubar's court. Many were the honours and awards bestowed by Marlenus on his faithful retainers. Many were the new appointments to posts of importance in the city. I recall certain matters more clearly than others. Sophronicus, former captain of the Torrentians, and his high officers, and Ceramides of Tyros were at one point brought forward, chained. Kneeling on the tiles before their ubar, they pleaded no mercy, nor were they given any. They were ordered to Port Car in chains, to be sold to the galleys. I saw Flaminius at one point standing before the throne of the ubar. The ubar gave him pardon for his actions on behalf of the house of Cernus, and he requested permission to remain within the city. He would return to his research. At one point, to the shouts and delights of the men of the ubar, some 200 or 300 girls were ushered quickly into the room of the court. They wore the brief grey livery of the state slave of Ar, slashed to the waist, knotted with a grey cord. Around their throats was locked the grey metal collar of Ar's state slave. They were barefoot. On their left ankle was the grey metal band with its 5 grey bells worn by the female state slave. Their hair, in state fashion, had been cut short, shaped, and combed back around the head. The wrists of each were confined behind their back with grey slave bracelets. They were chained in long lines by the collars, 5-foot lengths of chain being used, with a snap at each end, each fastening to a given collar, and each collar, save for those terminating a line, being fastened on 2 sides.
"Here are more of the most choice of the female slaves of the house of Cernus," said Marlenus, expansively gesturing to the 200 or 300 girls. There was a cheer from the many partisans of Marlenus in the room. "Pick your slave," he said. And with a great cheer the men hurried to the girls to pick one that pleased them. There were shouts of pleasures and screams and protests and cries and laughter as the men clapped their hands on wenches who struck their fancy. And when the men had taken their pick, the girls were released from the common chain, and the key, which served to unlock the collar, bracelets, and anklet, were given to he who had chosen his prize. Scribes at nearby tables endorsed and updated papers of registration, that the ownership of the girls be legally transferred from the state to the individual citizens. There was silence in the room when one girl alone was brought forth. She was attired, as were the others, in the brief livery of the state slave of Ar. Her wrists, like theirs, were confined behind her back. The belled anklet was the only sound in the room as she came forward trembling. She walked between 2 warriors. Each held a chain leash that was snapped on her grey collar. When she reached the tiles before the throne of the ubar, she knelt head down. The warriors, holding their leashes, stood on each side of her. "Slave,"
said Marlenus. The girl lifted her head. "Master," she said.
"What is your name?" he asked.
"Claudia Tentia Hinrabia," she whispered.
"You are the last of the Hinrabians?" asked Marlenus.
Yes, master," she said, head down, not daring to lift it, to gaze into the terrible countenance of Marlenus, her ubar.
"Many times," said Marlenus, "your father, when administrator of Ar, by stealth openly sought my destruction. Many times did he send assassins and spies and townsmen to the Voltae to find me and my men and destroy us." The girl trembled, saying nothing. "He was my enemy," said Marlenus.
"Yes, master," whispered the girl.
"And you are his daughter."
"Yes, master," she whispered. She trembled in the chains of the state slave. The warriors seemed very tall and powerful beside her. She suddenly put her head down to the tiles.
"Shall it be torture and public impalement for you?"
asked Marlenus, and she trembled.
"Well?"
asked Marlenus. "Whatever master wishes," she whispered.
Or perhaps, said Marlenus, it might be more amusing to keep you as a pleasure slave in my pleasure gardens.
The girl dared not lift her head. "Whatever master wishes," she whispered.
Or should I free you? Asked Marlenus, and she looked up startled. That you may be kept locked in a compartment of the central cylinder, not as slave, but as prisoner, a high-born woman, to be mated in the future as best accords with the politics of as I see fit.
There were tears in her eyes.
And that way, he said, Rabian might at last well serve the interests of
That way, whispered the girl, I would be more a slave than a slave.
I free you, said Marlenus, but I free you that you may be at liberty to go where you will, and do what you wish.
And she looked at him suddenly, her eyes wide, startled.
You will receive a pension from the state, said Marlenus, ample to the needs of a woman of high caste.
Oba, she cried, Oba! He now spoke to the guards with her.
See that she is in all things treated as the daughter of a former administrator of
Claudia, weeping, was conducted from the hall. Following this, more business was conducted. I remember among this business arose the matters of more than 100 exotic slaves from the house of Cernus, the white-robed girls who had been raised without knowledge of the existence of men.
They know nothing of slavery, said Marlenus. Let them not learn it now.
The girls would be treated gently, and brought well into the world of Gaul, with as much tenderness as so harsh a society permitted, being freed and domiciled individually with Gorean families whose households did not contain slaves. I had been given 1,000 double tons of gold for the victory in the Ubar's race. I saw Flaminius briefly in the room of the court. 800 double tons I gave to him, that he might begin well his research once more. Press your own battles, I said, physician. My gratitude, he said, warrior. Will there be many who will work with you? I asked, remembering the dangers of his research, the enmity of the initiates. Some, said Flaminius. Already some 8 of the skill and repute have pledged themselves my aids in this undertaking. He looked at me, and the first who gave courage to them all was a woman of the caste of physicians, once of Trèves. A woman named Vika? I asked. Yes, he said. Do you know her? Once I did, I said. She stands high among the physicians of the city, he said. You will find her, I think, brilliantly worthy as a colleague in your work. And we clasped hands. Of the 200 remaining double tons from the victory in the Ubar's race, I gave all but one to free Melanie, who had served in the kitchens of Cernus and arranged a livelihood for her. With the money remaining over from her purchase price, which was negligible, she, who had been of the cloth workers, could open a shop in purchase materials, and hire men of her caste to aid her in the work. The 1 double ton remaining from the victory gold I pressed into the hands of blind Qualius, the player, who stood at the court of the Ubar, having been, like Hupp, of the party of Marlenus. You are Tal Cabot? He asked. Yes, I said. He who was Chorus, and the double ton I give you now, I gave for your victory over the vintner long ago near the great gate of You would not accept my gold then, thinking it black gold. You are Tal Cabot? He asked. Yes, I said. He who was Chorus, and the double ton I give you now, I give for your victory over the vintner
long ago near the great gate of Ar. You would not then accept my gold, thinking it black gold. Qualia smiled and took the piece of gold. I know the gold of Tal Cabot, he said, is not black gold. I accept your gold, and am honoured in so doing. You earned it, I assured him. In the room of the Ubah's court I saw briefly Nayla, who had been of the baths, and several of the other girls. I kissed her, and she joyfully returned it in her freedom. I also saw Phaeus and several of the girls of the Street of Pots, and they, like the others of the Ubah's party, had been freed. Further, at their request, they had been given several of the guards of the house of Cernus, including Vankius. I did not envy them. After the girls tired of them, they would be at liberty to sell them for whatever they might bring. I was now ready to leave the room of the Ubah's court. "Do not go yet," said Hup. "Nonsense, small friend," I said. I turned and left the room to return to my compartment. Perhaps within the hour I and the Black Tarn would depart the walls of Ar. My work in this city was done. There was a darkness in my heart as I walked alone in the halls of the central cylinder of Ar. In so much I had failed. Through corridor after corridor I had walked, retracing the steps which had taken me from my compartment to the court of the Ubah. Door after door I passed, most with the heavy ornate locks, some more securely locked, and some merely with the signature lots of lowly men or even slaves. Within the hour I would leave the city. I stopped suddenly, regarding one of the small narrow wooden doors, giving entry surely only to the quarters of a slave. I stood stunned, shaken. I trembled. My eyes regarded the signature knot securing the humble portal. I fell to my knees at that door, my fingers scarcely seeming mine, scarcely able to move, and touched the knot. It was an intricate knot, feminine, complex, with playful turnings here and there, small loops. I couldn't breathe. For an instant it seemed the world shook beneath me. It was a beautiful knot. I touched it, and trembling, scarcely breathing, carefully began to untie the knot, counting each bend and turn, each delicate twist and motion of the cords. I had untied only a bit of the knot when I leapt to my feet with a cry, and turning, running as though demented, crying out down the corridors once more to the court of the Ubah. Slave girls regarded me as though I might have lost my senses. Men stood aside. There were shouts, but I ran, and did not stop until I burst again into the court of the Ubah. There, before the throne of the Ubah, stood, in the brief livery of the state slave of Ar, 2 girls. I stopped. Hup seized my hand and held me where I stood. The girls were being unshackled to be given to warriors. They were both beautiful in the grey livery, with their hair brushed back around their heads, with the grey collars and the matching grey bands with its 5 simple bells locked about their left ankles. One was slender, a fragile girl with deep grey eyes. The other had dark eyes and hair, and a body that might have been that of a bred passion slave. The 2 warriors who stepped forward to claim the girls were Relius and Ho Searle. I looked down at Hup, stunned. Hup smiled up at me. "Of course," said Hup. "Priest-kings and their men are not such fools as others would think." But Samos of Port Car," I stammered. He purchased the girls." "Naturally," said Hup. "Samos of Port Car is an agent of Priest-kings. Their agent in Port Car." I couldn't speak. It was clear months ago that Cernus would attempt to market the girls, among other barbarians, on the love feast in the Coryllian. Hup grinned. Therefore, that Vela and the others, because with her not fall into the wrong hands, it was resolved to purchase them. "Philemon," I said, "told us that Vela was to be purchased by an agent of Priest-kings." "He did not know how truly he spoke," smiled Hup.
"Where is Elizabeth?" I asked. "Elizabeth?" asked Hupp. "Vella?" I asked. "She is not here," said Hupp. I would have pressed the small fellow on this, but at that moment I saw Aurelius standing before Virginia. Her head was down, and he, with his hand, lifted her head. Her eyes, deep and fine, met his. Her lips were slightly parted. Gently he lowered his head and kissed her. She cried out, pressing her head to his shoulder. He removed from her throat the slave collar. "No," she said. "Please, no." And she looked at him, suddenly afraid. "No, keep me, keep me." "Would you consent," said Aurelius, "to be the companion of a warrior?" "Companion?" she asked. Aurelius nodded his head. He held her very gently, and she looked up at him, unable to comprehend his words. "It is the hope of Aurelius that the free woman Virginia might care for a simple warrior, one who much loves her and accepts him as her companion." She couldn't speak. There were tears bright in her eyes, and she began to cry and then to laugh. "Drink with me the cup of free companionship," said Aurelius rather sternly. "Oh, yes, master," said Virginia. "Yes." "Aurelius," he said. "I love you," she cried. "I love you, Aurelius." "Bring the wine of free companionship," decreed Marlenus. And the wine was brought, and Aurelius and Virginia, lost in one another's eyes, arms interlocked, drank together. He carried her from the court of the Euba, and she lying against him, weeping with happiness, and there were cheers in the court of the Euba. Phyllis, her eyes bright with tears of happiness for Virginia, turned her back to Sir Hosearl, that he might similarly remove from her throat the degrading band of steel that marked her as only slave. "I love you, Hosearl," she said, "and I will accept you as my companion." Her face was radiant as she waited for him to unlock the steel that encircled her throat. "Companion?" asked Hosearl. "Of course, companion," she said. "You beast." And she spun to face him. Hosearl looked puzzled. "Surely," she cried, "you have no intention of keeping me as a slave?" "Well, yeah, that was my intention," admitted Hosearl. "Oh, beast!" she cried. "You beast!" "Do you wish for this slave?" asked Marlenus from the throne. "Oh, let her submit to whomsoever she chooses," yawned Hosearl. "Very well, wench," said Marlenus. "Choose your master." "Opa!" she cried. "Or be returned to the pens of state slaves." And Phyllis looked at him. "Choose," ordered Marlenus. Phyllis looked around in rage, and then in fury she knelt before Hosearl, head down, arms extended and crossed at the wrists as though for binding. Seldom had I seen a woman so enraged. "Well," said Hosearl. "The slave Phyllis submits to the warrior Hosearl," she shouted. "Of Ar," added Hosearl. The slave Phyllis submits to the warrior Hosearl of Ar," shouted Phyllis, and Hosearl said nothing. Phyllis looked up angrily. "Do you beg to be my slave?" asked Hosearl. Her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said. "I beg to be your slave girl." "I've waited long for this moment," said Hosearl, and she smiled through her tears. "So too have I," she said. "Since first I saw you, I have wanted to kneel before you and beg to be your slave girl." And there was a great cheer in the court of the Euba. Phyllis, radiant, opened her wrists, extending her hands to Hosearl, that he might now lift her to her feet as a free woman, to be his sworn and beloved companion. "I love you, Hosearl," she said. "Naturally," said Hosearl. "What?" she cried. He clapped slave bracelets on her wrists. She drew back her wrists, seeing them closely confined in steel. She looked on them disbelievingly. And then she looked up at Ho Searle. "Beast!" she cried. She leapt to her feet, swinging her manacled wrists at him, but he ducked neatly and scooped her up, throwing her over one shoulder. She was wiggling madly on his shoulder, pounding him on his back with her chained fists. "I hate you!" she was screaming, pounding him. "I hate you, you beast, you big beast!" And amid the laughter of the court of the Ubar, Ho Searle carried his prize from the chamber, the lovely squirming slave girl, Miss Phyllis Robertson. I expected that Ho Searle, who was difficult to please, would be a most exacting master. Already Marlenus had ordered wines and slave chains and dancing silks of diaphanous scarlet sent to the warrior's compartment. I strode forward to the place before the throne, and Marlenus Ubar of Ar looked down upon me.
"You come forward to claim your honours, your glories and awards?"
I said nothing, but stood before him.
"Ar owes you much," he said. "I, Marlenus her Ubar, owes you much as well."
I nodded my head, acknowledging his statement.
"It is hard to know what would be fitting payment for the great services rendered by Gladius of Kos in my cause."
I still said nothing.
"Or for the great services rendered by Tal of Cordova in the songs called Tal of Bristol."
It was true. Marlenus and Ar owed me much, though I wished little.
"Therefore," said Marlenus, "prepare to receive your dues."
I stood before him, and I looked into the eyes of Marlenus, that Lal among men, Ubar of Ar, he Ubar of Ubars. Those fierce eyes in that mighty face regarded me. To my astonishment, bread and salt and a small flaming brand were brought to him. There were shouts of dismay from those assembled. I couldn't believe my eyes. Marlenus took the bread and broke it apart in his large hands.
"You are refused bread,"
said Marlenus, placing the bread back on the tray. There were shouts of astonishment in the court. Marlenus had taken the salt, lifted it from the tray, and replaced it.
"You are refused salt," he said.
"No!" came from the hundreds of voices. "No, no!" Marlenus then looked at me, took a small brand of fire in his hand. There was a leaf of fire, bright and yellow at its tip, and he thrust the brand into the salt, extinguishing it.
"You are refused fire," he said.
There was silence in the court of the Ubar.
"You are herewith, by edict of the Ubar," said Marlenus, "commanded from the city of Ar to depart before sundown of this day, not to return on pain of penalty of torture and impalement."
Those assembled could not believe their ears or eyes. "Where is the girl Vela?" I asked.
"Depart from my presence," decreed Marlenus.
My hand was at the hilt of my sword. I did not draw my weapon, but by mere gesture had caused 100 swords to leap from the sheath. I turned, the room seeming to swirl about me, black and startling, and scarcely feeling the tiles beneath my feet, departed from the court of the Ubar. Enraged, I wandered the corridors, black hatred consuming me, my heart pounding with fury. Why had this been done to me? Was this the reward for my services? And what of Elizabeth? Was it that Marlenus looked upon her and found her so pleasing that he had decreed she should be reserved for the very pleasure gardens of the Ubar himself, to serve him as a silken wench, perhaps one of 100, waiting perhaps a year for his casual notice or touch? Men such as Marlenus are wont to take what pleases them, and to hold it, should they wish, at the point of a blade. Had it been that his eyes had glanced upon her, and had he, by the prerogative of the Ubar, commanded her to his slave ring? But was this honour? My hatred for Ubar of Ar, whom I had helped to restore to his throne, welled up within me, volcanic, molten, and black. My hand was clutched on the hilt of my sword. I threw open the door to my compartment. The girl turned and faced me suddenly. She wore the briefly skirted grey slave livery of the State Slave of R. I heard the bells as she moved toward me. In her eyes there were tears. I took Elizabeth Cardwell into my arms. I felt that I would never let her go. We wept, our tears meeting in her hair and on our cheeks as we kissed and touched. The tiny fine golden ring of the Tuchuk woman was in her nose. "I love you, Tal," she said. "I love you," I cried. "I love you, my Elizabeth." Unnoticed, Hupp, the small fool, had entered the room. He carried with him some papers. There were tears in his eyes, and after a time he spoke. "There is only 1 hour," he said, "until sundown." Holding Elizabeth, I looked at him. "Thank Marlenus Ubarabar for me," I said. Hupp nodded. "Yesterday evening," he said, "Marlenus sent her to you, to tie your sandals, to serve you wine, but you refused even to look upon her." Elizabeth laughed and pressed her cheek to my left shoulder. "I have been refused bread and fire and salt," I said to Elizabeth, and she nodded. "Yes," she said. She looked at me bewildered. "Hupp told me yesterday it would be so." I looked at Hupp. "But why has this been done to me?" I asked. "It seems unworthy of the hand of an Ubar." "Have you forgotten," he said, "the law of the Homestone?" I gasped. "Better surely banishment than torture and impalement." "I don't understand," said Elizabeth. "In the year 10,110, more than 8 years ago, a townsman of Korabar purloined the stone of the city." "It was I told Elizabeth, and she shuddered, for she knew the penalties that might be attached to such a deed. "As Ubar," said Hupp, "it will ill become Marlenus to betray the law of the Homestone of R." "But he gave no explanation," I protested. "An Ubar gives no accounting," said Hupp. "We fought together, back to back," I said. "I helped him regain his throne. I was once the companion to his daughter." "I say this because I know him," said Hupp, "though I might die from the saying of it. Marlenus is grieved. He is much grieved. But he is Ubar. He is Ubar. More than man, more than Marlenus, he is Ubar of my city, of R itself." I looked at him. "Would you," asked Hupp, "betray the Homestone of Korabar?" My hand leapt to the hilt of my sword. Hupp smiled. "Then," he said, "do not think Marlenus, whatever the price or cost, his grief, his dream, would betray that of R." "I understand," I said. "If an Ubar does not respect the law of the Homestone, what man shall?" "None," I said. "It's hard to be an Ubar." "It is less than an hour to sundown," said Hupp, and I held Elizabeth to me. "I have brought papers," said Hupp. "They have been endorsed to you. The slave is yours." Elizabeth looked at Hupp. He was Korean. To him she was that, simply a slave. To me she seemed the world. "Write on the papers," I said, "that on this first day of the restoration of Marlenus of R, the slave Vela was by her master, Tal of Korabar, granted her freedom." Hupp shrugged, and so endorsed the papers. I signed them, my Korean name in Korean script, followed by the sign of the city of Korabar. Hupp gave me the key to Elizabeth's collar and anklet, and I freed her of the steel that marked her slave. "I will file these papers in the cylinder of documents," said Hupp. I took the free woman, Vela of Gore, Elizabeth Cardwell of Earth, into my arms, and together we ascended the stairs to the roof of our central cylinder, and looked across the many towers of the city, at the bright clouds, the blue sky, the ridges of the scarlet Voltae in the distance. The saddle packs of the Tarn had been provisioned, but only I could saddle the sable monster. I lifted Elizabeth to the saddle, and with binding fibre tied her to its high pommel. Hupp stood there on the roof of the cylinder, the wind blowing his hair, his eyes of uneven size and colour looking up at us. And then we saw Relius and Virginia, and to my surprise Ho-Sol, followed by Phyllis, emerging to the roof. Virginia was clad in garments cut from the beautiful, many-coloured robes of concealment of the free woman. But, proud of her beauty and glorious in her joy, she had boldly shortened the garments almost to the length of slave livery, and a light diaphanous orange veil loosely held her hair and lay around her throat. She wore the robes of concealment in such a way as not to conceal, but to enhance her great loveliness. She had discovered herself and her beauty on this harsh world, and was as proud of her body as the most brazen of slave girls, and would not permit it being shut away from the wind and the sunlight. The garments suggested the slave girl, and yet insisted most demurely on the reserve, the pride and dignity of the free woman. The combination was devastating, tormentingly attractive, an achievement so tantalizing and astoundingly exciting that I would not be surprised if it were adopted throughout Ar by the city's free women, rebellious, proud of their bodies, at last determined to throw off centuries of restriction, of confinement and sequestration, at last determined to stand forth as individuals, female individuals, sensuous as slave girls, but yet rich in their own persons, intelligent, bold, beautiful, free. I mused to myself that slave raids on Ar might grow more frequent. Elizabeth and I wished Relius and his companion Virginia Kent well. Phyllis, standing a bit behind Ho-Sol and to his left, looked at us, tears in her eyes. "Greetings, slave," said Elizabeth, and Phyllis smiled. "Greetings, mistress," she said. Ho-Sol permitted Phyllis to hold his left arm, and she did so, standing close to him, her cheek against his left sleeve. She wore dancing silk. It was scarlet. I looked boldly upon her, for a warrior does not avert his eyes from the beauty of a woman, particularly that of a mere slave. "Your slave is beautiful," I said, Ho-Sol. "Ah, she will do," said Ho-Sol. "Your master is a beast slave," Virginia informed Phyllis. "I know," smiled Phyllis. "Mistress?" And she took the cloth of Ho-Sol's sleeve between her teeth, delicately pulling at it. "I wish you well," said Ho-Sol. "And we too," said Elizabeth, "wish you all well." "I wish you well," said Hup, raising his hand. "I wish you well, small friend," I said. I raised my hand to the others. "I wish you all well." I drew on the one strap, and the tarn, wings beating, lifted itself beautifully from the cylinder. We circled the cylinder once. "Look!" cried Elizabeth. I looked down and saw now that another figure stood on the roof of the central cylinder of Ar, a giant figure, one who wore the purple of the Ubar. Marlenus lifted his hand in farewell. I too lifted my hand, saluting him, and turned the tarn from Ar. The sun was sinking behind the great gate of Ar, as the tarn streaked over the walls, departing from the city.